Hi, I'm Niall O'Carroll, and this is Inertia Creeps. Hey, Julia, you're very welcome. This is an exciting chat for me. I'm really looking forward to exploring kind of stories about your career and your philosophies. And you're a leader that obviously I have a lot of respect and regard for. But maybe for the people tuning in, to give them a kind of an understanding of where we're coming from. Maybe if you could give us a quick kind of run through your career and how you are in the position you're in right now.
Well, thank you for having me and welcoming me. Well, always hard to do that in a couple of sentences, right? But my current position, I am at Inca, or mostly known as IKEA. We and I am together with some colleagues leading the global health and well-being strategy and work for our 31 markets at this time. So that is a fantastic position to be in, and have very, very interesting dialogues, and to be able, with all the other health and well-being leaders in the markets and all of our countries, really try to do the best for all of our coworkers. That is doing their utmost every day at the work.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? There's definitely a movement in the corporate world to recognize well-being and the health of employees. And I suppose off the back of the pandemic, a lot of things have changed in our understanding of the human and the aspects of work life. The kind of what used to be the nonsense of work-life balance is now a thing where people actually are demanding work-life balance, and so there is an onus and a pressure on organizations. And IKEA do have a reputation for putting the well-being of their people, like they tend to do more than just tokenism, which is what the corporate world can be accused of sometimes. From your perspective in your role, and I mean, considering how culturally challenging it is, because IKEA is in so many different countries, how do you, when you're kind of like sitting down and you're looking at a strategy that involves a very disparate level of even of qualification with your workforce, from the warehouses and the stores to the offices and, all the different elements of what IKEA do. How do you kind of incorporate an understanding of what all levels of your organization need when you're planning a health and well-being strategy?
Yeah, that is of course a really big challenge. We are far from perfect, of course, and really always try to figure out how we do that even better. But of course, there are many aspects and many answers to that questions, because of course we can both look from an organizational point of view, what we as an organization and employer must, of course, also based on legal requirements in the different countries, but also, of course, what we aim to do and what we believe in, based in our culture and values, to really create a healthy and safe place to work. So there are, of course, a lot of things from an organizational point of view that you can steer, right? You have the basics in place, of course, to be compliant, but then you can always design your work with processes, and that, of course, I could talk about for such a long time. But then, of course, we also have the individual perspective, and that is not equally easy, right? To really try to support, engage, and understand the coworkers. And of course, they are not equally the same, and they have not the same needs. So trying to set up processes, support, systems that actually make it possible to individualize as much as possible when the coworker needs it.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is a huge challenge. And one of the things that I find particularly interesting and I'm very passionate about is the idea of how we recognize neurodiversity in workplace environments. And, I have a specific view on it that isn't always that popular, but I personally was diagnosed with ADHD about 6 months ago. And it's to me, it was more an explanation of understanding about why certain things have happened in my life that I don't see it as a victim, or I don't see it as a negative. I just see it as it just is, both my kids are heavily dyslexic and have really struggled in formal education. And that's really made me think about the corporate space and also challenge the idea that, like the research and the statistics and the predictions tell us that 20% of the world's population are neurodiverse, or or may or may not have been diagnosed with ADHD or whatever the case may be. But that suggests that the other 80% of the population are typical. And that the idea that typical or normal or, behave in a certain way. I mean, I've never worked with two people who do things the same way. And my kind of view is that the reality for the corporate world, and where the big challenge is right now, is acknowledging that if we all channel information in different ways, if we all behave in different ways, if some of us are more comfortable in groups and some of us are more comfortable working on our own, that you have this massive challenge of creating an environment and flexible work arrangements, and ergonomic and inclusive office designs. And, like there's so many different elements to it. And obviously there's a backlash against that of the people kind of calling people snowflakes, and, you just need to get on with it and stuff. But, and part of the issue at the end of all of that is that the very conversation about productivity then becomes almost like a dirty word. Like we shouldn't be talking about productivity. We should be talking about humanity. And I kind of have always felt from my work in sport, especially, that the more you were on top of what was going on the human and the personal side, the better the productivity and the better the performance. So the logical thing for the corporate space is to kind of embrace all that.
Yeah.
So that's a long-winded rant about me. But from your perspective, when you're implementing strategies, and the challenge with strategies is to reach individuals across your organization who are all, disparate and different and have different challenges. How do you work around that, and what's your kind of philosophy around that, and your ambition, I suppose, with the work you're doing?
Yeah, also super hard to answer, and there is no quick fix, of course, and there is not an easy and simple way to succeed. And I think, there are many layers of that question, of course. As an organization and as an employer, I think that, of course, we can look at different needs, and neurodiversity, or those 20% that you referred to. That is, of course, a huge amount of coworkers that need some adjustments, but there are probably equally as many as have other needs based on other challenges in life. So I think that, again, look as much as we can, look at the individual needs, no matter if it's based on neurodiversity, situations or challenges, or how do I put it correctly? But it could also be something totally different that makes you maybe from time to time be able to adjust and have a flexible work setup, for example. So it could be, but from an organizational point of view, of course, you cannot do everything at the same time. So if you have knowledge about certain specific challenges that you have identified and understood the root causes, then of course you will take one step at a time, right? So we have, of course, a main goal to create a healthy and safe place to work, basically. And that could mean so many different things. And we cannot fix everything at once, right? So it's super complex, of course, to try to understand how we do it best. But again, I think that looking at both for example, men or women or non-binary or age related, if you are 20 years old or if you're 40 or 65, if you work in our logistics centers or if you work as me behind a computer most of the time, there will be needs to be met for you to be seen, and to be as engaged and as possible, and in a healthy way that supports you and your work. And then it's super challenging, of course, but I think that we, by setting the base is in place, which we have done by connecting the strategy that we want to support our coworkers in different perspectives. So physical and mental and financial well-being is three main pillars of our focus areas, and that then mean, of course, different things. It's prevention and education, it's access to treatment, of course, and there is also a continuous improvement with, really, from an organizational point of view, understand data. So how do we gather data, and how do we understand our coworkers, both then from a data point of view, but also by qualitative interviews or dialogues.
Mm.
And how do we train the managers to actually also listen and understand the needs in their colleagues and teams?
And actually, you've touched on something there. I mean, there's so much that's so cool, and where I want to go with it's selecting the priorities, because you're talking about so much good stuff there. But one thing that is interesting, and we talk about leadership a lot, and I am very passionate about the world of leadership training, and it's what I do for a living. I'm also very passionate that the vast majority of the off-the-shelf generic leadership development work that's out there is pointless, because it's designed for traits, for the types of people, and I don't believe that we fit into categories anymore. That, a leader is this and looks like this, because you can be a great leader and be very isolated and solo, but you just happen to be extraordinarily good at being honest and upfront and direct with your people and give them feedback. And a lot of people in the corporate world tend to put relationships above actual feedback and honesty and having conversations that are difficult. And one of the challenges is, and it's funny, I was only talking to a guy who's the CEO of a large multinational restaurant chain, and most of the staff that they hire are quite young, coming out of school. But he's noticed in the shift of generations between the generation that are now his managers, which are still quite young, and the new staff that are coming in, that the new staff are very comfortable talking about mental health, talking about their emotions and their well-being.
Yeah.
Whereas the manager level are from, even if it's only 5 or 10 years in the difference, they're in a different place when it comes to mental health, and they have no clue where to even begin. And how do you assist? Because for most corporate organizations right now that I'm hearing, it's middle management is their concern. But middle management are a reflection of senior management. And how do you have those conversations that train leaders to deal with things like mental health in a kind way, but also in a way that you don't create some label that somebody has to carry with them through their career then afterwards?
Yeah, that is a really, really interesting perspective, actually. Of course, we have my colleagues and in the leadership and teams here at INCA are doing a fantastic job creating leadership programs and developing that area. But one thing that I think is very significant at the moment is that we need to support our managers and leaders to also understand their role. Because from what I have seen, and this is only my perception working with the field and talking to people, is that we have a lot of leaders, or almost probably everyone is very people-centric, and they really want to do their very best, and they are trained in how to build successful teams, or how to look into performance and evaluation and targeting and KPIs. But when it comes to, for example, enable a healthy place to work, I think that the many have basic knowledge about mental health for different reasons, maybe from personal experience or interest. But I think still equally as many don't have it. So we are training our both managers and co-workers in basic knowledge about the mental health, detect early signs, and basic knowledge. And that is kind of easy to do in that sense. But what I see as the threshold for managers to even be more proactive is that they are afraid of two things. And that is to step into someone's personal integrity, or like being afraid of interfering in something that is very personal, and might be hard to have those conversations, right? And also the other thing is that they are afraid that they are required to be experts. If there is a coworker that opens up and shares about maybe a tough situation or a mental health challenge, the manager is of course not the expert. We have employee assistance programs, or we have therapists, and we have doctors and all of that support available, because that are the experts, that is their expertise. And the manager's role is to listen in, to be present, and to guide the coworker to the right medical support if they want and if they see it needed, right? So, but I think that, and what I see is that many are afraid of it, because then if I hear my coworkers, are very challenged with something, what does that require of me as a leader then, or a manager? So I think we have a big task here to actually clarify the role and to lower also the pressure on our managers, so they are not as afraid maybe to actually have these conversations.
That's a really good point. And it's something, I saw it in my career working in sport as a psychologist, that there'd be an assumption that you're there to deal with all the issues.
Yeah.
And actually, I had to have these conversations regularly going, I'm not a psychotherapist.
No.
And if an issue arose in any conversation I had with an athlete, a player, or even a coach, my first port of call was direct them to the experts, because part of the and it's part of the problem for all of us in many areas of what we do. But it's this kind of assumption once you go into a role that you have to have all the answers. And I'm a great believer in great leaders ask the questions. And I think when you're dealing with especially with something as serious as mental health problems, and it's something that is unquestionably growing, and whether it's that there is more mental health issues in society, or whether it's that we're more comfortable talking about the mental health issues in society, that's something that remains to be seen, and it'll be interesting to see where the data goes in the next number of years. But we still can't ignore the fact that these issues are there. And it's something I just wonder, like Sweden is a country that reputationally has done a far better job than a lot of countries in supporting its people, whether it's from a health point of view or whether it's understanding kind of, there's a more socially minded, I suppose, a consciousness in Sweden. And I know that in Ireland, and some of the people that I'll be speaking to in this series from Ireland will be very vocal in how poor mental health services are. Do you feel that their services are there to support leaders? Because I feel like the mental health industry should be supporting the corporate world more in understanding what the signs are and how to direct and where to direct and how to handle it. Because in reality, if your managers are dealing with these conversations, then somebody needs to be looking out for them. And part of the reason they're avoiding these conversations is that, a great interview I did one time was with a guy that I had a great pleasure working with a few times, a guy called John Amici. And John was played in the NBA for 10 years, but he's now an organizational psychologist and a very clever man. But he kind of said that he believed that in the corporate world, people don't have difficult conversations because they're emotionally expensive. And if it's emotionally expensive and we know that they're not having these conversations and we're trying to help our managers deal with these emotionally expensive conversations, how do we create an environment, I suppose, that they feel supported and allowed to do these things whilst ensuring that everyone else gets what they need from this the service, I suppose. And is there a right answer, I suppose? And if so, have Sweden figured it out better than some other country?
Oh, actually, I don't know. I don't know. I think that at least from a societal point of view, as a Swede and living in Sweden, I think that we have come quite far in reducing the stigma of talking about mental health. And so that I really think that have been a huge progress in the openness and the understanding and the psychological safety of talking about maybe your challenges or your family members' challenges or whatever it might be. Since maybe 10 years ago, I see a big difference from 10 years ago, for example. But with that said, and this, I don't know how it is to be, a civilian then in another country than Sweden, because if you are a private person searching for a psychologist, for example, there are huge queues. It's so hard actually to be able to receive help. There is a fantastic healthcare system, but it's also very, I think, very heavily affected of also then reducing the stigma, because then of course I don't think that they have been able to ramp up the resources in the same level as we are actually raising the awareness and talking about it, and actually also really give the message that seek help if you need, don't be afraid. And then the people reach out, and I think that the systems, the healthcare system has not in the same speed been able to actually have resources that are meeting that need. So that is from a more of a personal point of view, if you are a private just citizen. But on the other hand, of course, as a company, you have other resources. You have contracted healthcare for coworkers or manager or from the organization. So these are two different realities in Sweden.
When you're like in the work you do, and I mean the whole workplace ecosystem is a huge thing, and it's particularly, I mean, IKEA take their culture very seriously, and again, as I said earlier, a lot of companies pay lip service to this stuff or will invest in things to be seen to be investing, but IKEA do strike you as an organization who do believe they're drinking the cola or whatever is the phrase. But when you're working on, I mean, if you're looking at, like you spoke earlier about, you were talking about kind of values of diversity and equity and inclusion, and understanding the challenges. Like one thing where I think the corporate world has fallen down, or and society has fallen down to a large degree, is there's an awful lot of talk about diversity. There's a great awareness now of diversity. I am chairman of an Olympic sporting movement over here, and we've just voted to extend our board to ensure gender balance and equality across the board membership. We're doing that because our government have told us if we don't, they'll cut our funding. I passionately believe it's the right thing to do, and I'm very proud of the membership who voted it virtually unanimously in favor of allowing of making that change. But we're in 2023 and we're making a change to ensure that women are equally represented on a board, which it seems ludicrous. But then you look at the challenges around, racially, around neurodiverse, around, you mentioned the whole kind of non-binary issue that has really become topical since COVID, which is really fascinating how in a very short space of time, it's become a really huge topic. But one of the things the corporate world are very good at is creating diversity. So they'll like in our case, we're hiring now, and I have the great pleasure of identifying the women who are potentially going to come onto our board, and there's some fantastic candidates, and it's wonderful because we're hiring people to do the job that we need them to do, and it has nothing to do with their gender. They're just very good at what they do. However, we can turn around at the end of this year when we've got gender balance on our board and say, now we've our job done. Our job's only starting. But from a corporate perspective, it's very easy to tick the box of diversity and say that we have, we're racially representative, we're gender representative, et cetera, et cetera. But inclusion is such a different thing. And I've had the great pleasure to work with all sorts of different people in my career. And even on this show, I'm working with different people. I've got a phenomenal lady that I've great respect for, who kind of keeps me honest every day and is and really challenges me. But she's also educated me on understanding how to speak about race, how to speak about sexuality, and it's part of growing up and learning and growing as a human being is to open your mind to these concepts. And I also work with a guy who's from a place called Kerry in the southwest of Ireland, and it's a very random place, and that's about as diverse as you get, But the idea is that we learn from each other and we grow around each other when we're open to understanding each other's culture. But when you're dealing with people of different backgrounds and different, whether it's racially different, whether it's, there's a huge movement in the world at the moment, which is massively disturbing from a kind of a far right perspective that's very anti-immigrant. And I find it hilarious, like in a depressing way, that in Ireland, we would be talking about any kind of anti-immigration movement because Ireland has been built on immigration. We've had hundreds of years of sending people, like the diaspora. The Irish diaspora is huge and has huge influence now. I mean, the Irish American vote has a huge influence in who becomes president of America. We're this tiny little country, but our reach is so far because we have emigrated over the centuries. And this is it's common in America, it's common in Europe. This kind of movement towards not only not recognizing immigration, but being threatened by it. And I guess when I'm looking at, and especially for an organization like yours that has its fingerprint in so many countries and so many cultures, when you're developing a diversity philosophy, how do you ensure that goes beyond just the hiring of the face and introduce something that's inclusive where people actually feel like they belong? Because that's the key element, isn't it? Is the belonging, as opposed to the it's not just being, it's belonging.
As you referred to, like IKEA has for 80 years, celebrating 80 years last year, had a really, really strong foundation in the values, and that is, for example, like togetherness, or that you can be yourself and bring your whole self to work, and that is a very, very strong part of our culture. With that said, we are far from done, right? So as you mentioned, it's kind of easy to put 50-50 gender balance in leadership positions. For example, if we are now referring to male and female, of course, there are other perspectives of that as well. But if we take that as an example, but having a seat at the table is not the same thing as have a voice at the table, right? So that is really the next step to really ensure that you are also being listened to, not only just having a chair to sit on. So there are so many different layers of it, of course, and that is, it's not my expertise working with that strategy, but that we are super aligned, of course, with health and well-being and ED&I, as it's so interconnected and so interdependent. Because if you cannot be yourself at work, you will not feel well. You are not experience a healthy and safe place you work. You are not experience a psychological safety to express yourself. So it's, of course, I think from both health and well-being and mental health perspective and inclusion perspective, the baseline is psychological safety, right? I think that is the absolute base where we really focus to create that, because that will also ensure that even if you are talking about your neurodiversity, your need for adaptation in your workplace, or if you're saying that I struggle with family members that are ill, or if you struggle with feeling not listened to because of if you are a minority, for example. This is the psychological safety needs to be there. And then, of course, we can do so much more as an organization to measure, to really look into the data, and also being really long term, right? Because there is no quick fix. And this is an ongoing prioritization and needs to be. And I think that from a perspective of inclusion, I think role models is also very important to actually have in an organization, to show the diversity from different aspects.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting you talk about the data, because it is one of the challenges with all these programs. Like, and you obviously have your hand across so many with a health and well-being platform. But the idea, like one of the areas that I've always tried to identify why I like to think I'm different to a lot of people who do the leadership development stuff, is because I'm passionate about measuring impact. I don't want to do something if it's just for the sake of doing it to pick up the check. And don't get me wrong, the check is lovely, but there has to be an impact. There has to be a point to it. And when you guys are working on the things, and there's a lot of stuff out there, a lot of KPIs that people talk about, like employee engagement scores and retention rates of minorities and, inclusion surveys and all this kind of thing. But how do you guys kind of measure the impact of the work you're doing so that you're informed on what the next target area is?
Yeah, from a health and well-being perspective, and also from an ED&I perspective, of course, we have, as many other organizations, a co-worker survey. Really looking into asking the questions that, so we understand. Do you feel that you can, be yourself at work? Do you feel that you have the right support to handle your different challenges? So, of course, we have those kind of measurements to look into the coworker surveys. We also have specific other possibilities, to ask questions to our coworkers. But then, of course, we can also look into other types of data. For example, the utilization of employee assistance program. How is that utilized? In what way? And is it also utilized by everyone, or is there maybe some target group that is more representative and actually utilizing the support available? And do we need to target information or support in a better way to coworkers or groups of coworkers that might not utilize our support equally as much? And we can, of course, also look at, insurance claims. We can look at absenteeism and presenteeism. So there are different ways to look at it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And as somebody who has climbed the climbed the ladder in a difficult corporate environment. What do you think are do you think the barriers are still there to women's advancement in the corporate space, or do you think that the barriers are now aimed differently, and or even do you feel like there are, I've always felt like the argument about equality was the first step, but equity is actually where we should be aiming for. And I've seen exactly what you spoke about earlier when you mentioned like female having been present in a room or having a voice in a room are two very different things. And I've actually been in boardroom settings where the only woman in the room was asked to take the notes, which is massively insulting, but quite common, right?
Or go get the coffee. Don't forget.
Yeah. Exactly. Which Shem would, who's my boss on this show, would tell you that that's pretty much, I send her for coffee all the time because she makes good coffee. But from that perspective, like when you identify the barriers, do you feel that and obviously your experience in IKEA is going to be different to what a lot of women are facing. But do you feel that the barriers are less so now, or do you think that the barriers are still there? It's just that there are more women knocking on the door now that can't be ignored anymore.
Yeah. Oh, it's super, super hard. I think that from a societal point of view and looking into different parts of our work life, I think there is absolutely still barriers. I think that we have, of course, come a long way, but there are still barriers in many different layers, I think. And also looking into different branches and of course, there are still varieties in male-dominated areas and female-dominated areas, if we use those two perspectives. And of course, at IKEA and Inca, we have for a long time really focused work looking at then the gender balance for key positions and a manager's position. And we have a 50-50. But then, of course, the next step is to include a more of intersectional approach. We have come a far long way in like 20 years of really securing gender balance in key positions and managers across Inca. But the next step is, of course, the intersectional point to be even better at being inclusive. But yeah, I think there are still challenges, and I think every company has their own challenge and really need to secure good processes, for talent processes, recruiting processes, and succession planning and role modeling and the knowledge about how valuable it is to be inclusive, right? And also looking at the financial results connecting to that. So
absolutely, and that's a key point, isn't it? Is that the again, it comes back to what I said at the start of it. Like, productivity isn't a bad word. Companies are, everybody's in business to make money. But there's ways you can do it that are just more human, and if that affects your bottom line positively, well, then it's a win-win. But one of the things I kind of believe in is I'm very much about open communication, and I feel like communication should flow both ways. And I think a lot of organizations kind of struggle with I suppose, hearing their employees. Like that, there's all these kind of initiatives that kind of encourage employee participation, but do employees feel like they're part of the decision-making process? And is that something you feel that you guys do well, or is that something that you strive to work on, that kind of idea that you're hearing? Because one of the challenges, right, and for me, like a middle-aged white male, learning about like all the challenges, and even like the whole conversation now about like the possibility of multiple genders and non-binary conversations and pronouns. I mean, this is all new.
Mm.
To me.
Mm.
And I had a wonderful conversation a little while back with a lady in America who had transitioned when they were 50. They had transitioned and had gone from being the owner of a construction company to having to kind of basically have to walk away from that career because the construction industry just wasn't ready for a woman who they formerly knew as a man. And I had a fabulous conversation with her, but she educated me so much because I try to be a good human, and I believe that everybody's entitled to live their life whatever way they want. But I had no clue where to even begin to start that conversation around the appropriate language. I even actually said at one stage about transformation, and she corrected me and said it was a transition. But she was wonderful because, unlike a lot of people in these areas who get really who are really angry about everything and want to fight, she was willing to acknowledge that I actually wanted to come and meet her and understand where she's coming from. And she wanted to help me get there. And from my perspective, it gave me a total different insight into the conversation, but also into the importance of us actually not introducing employee initiatives without listening to the employees and what they're actually looking for. Because otherwise I'm mansplaining to somebody what they need, if you know what I mean. When I need to hear what the issue is in order for me to fix it.
Yeah.
And is that kind of part of where you guys work, or is that how you frame things?
Yeah, but isn't that the same for everything, right? If we are talking about, for example, I have 2 teenagers at home. Can I talk to teenagers as a common group?
I have 2 as well. I know what you mean.
So, of course, I cannot talk about teenagers if I want to understand them. I have to talk to them and with them and have, questions and to be part and invite them in the dialogue, equally as much as aging parents. And I will say, oh, well, all seniors have these needs. Of course, they do not. We cannot talk about target groups or co-worker groups. We need to talk to and with, and of course that is the same for every group of people that we want to learn more about. And I also still need to learn. I'm no expert in that field of but we have fantastic co-workers or colleagues here that I work a lot with that are super good and experts, and we try to combine our different expertises, for example, to really understand and invite. And we have recently really had a great collaboration with the whole the ED&I team, as we have here at INCA, and then us from the health and well-being perspective, and also the leadership. And these 3 different, agendas or strategies or whatever we want to call it, we can learn super much from each other, and also to see the red threads, to really invite, listen into the different needs, and try to understand as much as we can to design the right support or education or processes that is needed. But of course, I am a middle-aged white woman working in the HR and people and culture field. Of course, I cannot sit here and guess what a 20-year-old guy that working temporary as he's studying in a store in France, for example. So of course I also need to go and talk to people and not about and guess. I think that goes for every group, let's say, that we have. It's super hard, and we really try to do our utmost best to capture these different voices in various ways.
And I think it's very cool, and it's so important that people hear these stories and understand, because it's very easy to get caught up in, I struggle with everything we have in society right now that is like increasingly about labeling our differences. And actually, it's easy to say the corporate world don't care, but actually there are people like you and like your organization who are trying to do the right thing. And we won't always get it right, but piece by piece, as you say, the more we listen, the more we learn, and the more we learn, the better things get. One final question for you. I'm going to throw a psychology one at you, just kind of
Sure.
But you talk about the relating to teenagers, and I understand. I have 2 teenagers at home, and it's a constant battle between being extraordinarily loving and close and like throwing things at each other in the space of 5 minutes. So, but if you in an alternate universe, you're walking down the street and you bump into you as a teenager, as an 18-year-old, and you're going out into the world, what one thing would you say of your worldview would you what one piece of advice would you give your younger self, knowing what you know now, going out into the world? Because we know our teenagers won't listen to us, so maybe your younger self might.
Oh, there are so many things that what I would love to give as an advice to is your younger version of myself. But I think that, and maybe that is also reflecting my age. It was not that common to talk about anything when I grew up, right? So you just needed to, get on with it, be nice, do your best, no matter what, right? So, and that is, of course, still something that I would like to say to, and also I do say to my kids and now. But I think that to actually learn more about yourself and why you are reacting in different ways when you are in different challenges or dialogues, and I try to understand, because if you understand more about your own patterns or reactions, then you can choose if you want to do something about it or not. Because you don't actually, from my perspective, you don't always need to do things, you don't always need to be better or reach out for support, not in every aspect. Sometimes it's just also very valuable to just understand, this is why I'm reacting like I do, this is why I feel like I do, and that's okay, right? I don't need to adjust that is just basic knowledge, and then I know. But also, to be a little bit more trained and have knowledge about understanding yourself, and then also understand when and how to change, if that is something that you want to do.
It's a good answer.
Yeah. I don't know if that would have helped anything, if that I was 18 and have heard that, but
yeah,
I have no clue.
We can only hope that we would listen to ourselves, but then I don't know if I listen to myself right now, so who knows?
Exactly.
Julia, thanks so much for taking the time. It's been a lovely conversation. Really, really interesting. We'll look forward to chatting to you again in the near future.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much.